Ahoy mateys, are you ready to embark on a thrilling adventure across the high seas? To plunder untold riches and live a life of freedom and fortune? Well, hold on to your parrots, because we're about to set sail for the adventure of a lifetime. Welcome aboard, the Scurvy Dogs. I be your host, and here's the tale of the infamous Blackheart's crew. We'll be exploring the golden age of piracy in the Caribbean and beyond. But before we hoist the colors and start plundering, I got a favor to ask. If they like tales of swashbuckling adventure and high seas hijinks, then be sure to stay tuned for more swashbuckling fun. Now let's dive into Chapter 1, the allure of the pirate myth. The ocean, it calls to us like a siren's song, doesn't it? We dream of adventure, of faraway lands and the thrill of the unknown. Who wouldn't want to be a pirate? In the 17th and 18th centuries, men from all walks of life were drawn to the pirate myth, each hoping to carve their own legend into history. Privateers they were called, legal pirates who preyed on the riches of the Spanish Main. Buccaneers, they terrorized the Caribbean, pillaging on the riches of the Spanish colonies. Brethren of the coast, they haunted the West African coast, capturing slaves and selling them to the highest bidder. They were outlaws, criminals, adventurers, rogues, sailors, soldiers, dreamers and schemers. We think of pirates today as noble outlaws, fighting against oppressive governments or greedy corporations. We imagine them as Robin Hoods of the sea, stealing from the rich and giving to themselves. And while there may be some truth to that, we can't ignore the ugly reality of their world. It was a world of blood and guts, where battles were fought with cutlasses and pistols at close quarters. It was a world of filth and disease, where the stench of stale waste and rotting food hung heavy in the air. It was a world of hunger and thirst, where scurvy and dysentery were common afflictions. Life expectancy for a pirate, if you could even call it that, averaged around 25 years, give or take. That's younger than most kids are when they start thinking about what kind of legacy they want to leave behind. Death stalked every pirate ship, whether through battle with rival crews or the elements or disease. Pirates died young, often leaving behind families who had little knowledge of their final years. So why would anyone want to be a pirate? What was the allure of this life of peril and grime? Well, for many it was the promise of riches. There's something about the idea of finding a buried treasure chest filled with gold and jewels that captures our imaginations. For others, it was the chance to escape the drudgery of their everyday lives. The ocean was big and mysterious and full of adventure, and for many landlubbers that was enough to make them yearn for the open sea. Then there were those who saw piracy as a way of life, a life free from the constraints of society and its rules. They wanted to live by their own code, to be their own bosses, to do whatever they wanted whenever they wanted. For these men, piracy was more than just a job, it was a way of life. But let's be real here, mateys. While the lure of buried treasure and adventure is strong, the reality of life on the high seas was far from the fairy tales we tell ourselves. The truth is, being a pirate wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. In fact, it was downright brutal. We're talking about a world where the only law was the law of the jungle, where life was cheap and death was always around the corner. These weren't the noble rogues we see in the movies. These were hardened criminals who killed without remorse and stole without shame. They were the scum of the earth, the bottom feeders who preyed on the weak. So why are we still so obsessed with the pirate myth? Why do we continue to be fascinated by these ruthless killers? Well, I believe it's because we all have a little bit of pirate in us. We all have that little voice inside us that yearns for adventure, that longs for freedom, that craves excitement. And when we hear the tales of daring escapes and epic battles and hidden treasures, our hearts race and our eyes widen. We want to be part of that world, if only for a moment. Piracy is a world of danger and excitement, a world where anything can happen and where the only limit is your own imagination. It's a world that's both terrifying and exhilarating, and it's a world that we can't help but be drawn to. As we set sail on our journey through the golden age of piracy, I want you to keep this in mind. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the real story of real people who lived and died during one of the most exciting periods in history. We'll meet pirates who became legends, pirates who died in obscurity, and everything in between. We'll see the good, the bad, and the ugly of the pirate world, and we'll learn what it really meant to be a pirate. So buckle up, me hearties, and prepare for adventure. This is the tale of Blackheart's crew. Chapter 1 ends here, but our journey has just begun. We've barely scratched the surface of the golden age of piracy. Now we're gonna hoist the colors and set sail for adventure, explore the Caribbean and beyond. We'll meet colorful characters, brave heroes, and maybe even a few villains along the way. But remember, mateys, this ain't no fairy tale. The pirate world was a dangerous place. We'll see the best and worst of humanity as we follow Blackheart's crew on their adventures. Will they find buried treasure? Will they escape the clutches of the law? Will they survive the perils of the high seas? Only time will tell. So stay tuned and find out next time on The Tale of Blackheart's Crew. The horrible life of pirates you wouldn't survive. Chapter 2. The Harsh Call of the Sea. Ahoy, mateys. Welcome to another chapter in our swashbuckling journey across the high seas. In our last episode, we talked about how people chose to become pirates, but now it's time to get real. Let's dive into Chapter 2, The Harsh Call of the Sea, where we'll explore why people had no choice but to turn to piracy. Who became pirates? This is a question that has intrigued historians for centuries, and today we are here to answer it. You might be picturing swashbuckling adventurers with a thirst for treasure and a taste for danger, and you'd be right, but the reality of piracy was far more complex than just a life of fortune and glory. In fact, many pirates weren't in it for the adventure, but simply because they had no other choice. So who were these men and women who turned to piracy out of desperation? Well, let's start with the sailors. The life of a sailor in the 17th and 18th centuries was not for the faint of heart. Long voyages, cramped conditions, and the constant threat of disease or death made it a tough profession. Many sailors jumped ship when given the chance, even if it meant joining a pirate crew. For them, piracy was a way out of a life of misery and hardship. Then there were the criminals. For those already wanted by the law, piracy offered a way to escape justice and make a new life for themselves. By joining a pirate crew, they could flee to remote islands and lawless waters where the law could not reach them. And finally, we must not forget the desperate men who turned to piracy out of sheer desperation, driven by poverty, hunger, or a need to provide for their families. Piracy, with its promise of quick and easy riches, was an appealing option for those who had little to lose. They risked their lives on the high seas, hoping to strike it rich and escape their miserable existence. But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows for these would-be pirates either. Recruitment to a pirate crew was often by force, not by choice. Captured sailors were given two options: join the crew or die. There were no tryouts, no applications, and certainly no employee benefits. If you were captured by a pirate ship, your fate was sealed. You were expected to drop everything and commit to a life of piracy with no way out. Imagine being on the open ocean, the salty wind whipping through your hair, when suddenly the horizon becomes clouded with the menacing silhouette of a pirate ship. Before you can react, they're upon you, swords drawn and ready to claim your life or force you to join their crew. In this cutthroat world, there was no room for hesitation or surrender. Once captured, you were expected to adapt quickly or face the consequences. The new recruits were thrown into the deep end, forced to learn the ways of piracy on the fly. They had to master the art of navigation, sword fighting, and sailing under the most extreme conditions. With little to no training, these men were expected to perform like seasoned pirates. Any mistakes could mean the difference between a successful voyage and a watery grave. They had to adapt fast, learn fast, and survive. It was a baptism by fire, and only the quick learners survived. Most did not choose to become pirates, they were forced into it. Let's take a closer look at what drove these men to take such drastic measures. The life of a sailor during the golden age of piracy was far from glamorous. In fact, it was a tough and dangerous profession that many would do anything to avoid. Sailors faced long periods at sea, cramped living conditions, and the constant threat of disease and death. When given the opportunity to escape the horrors of life at sea, many sailors jumped at the chance, even if it meant joining a pirate crew. Many of the men who joined pirate crews were ordinary sailors who had grown sick and tired of the mistreatment and abuse they suffered at the hands of their captains and shipowners. Life on merchant ships was often brutal and dehumanizing, with sailors subjected to harsh punishments and deplorable living conditions. As a result, many sailors saw piracy as a way out of a miserable and hopeless existence. Imagine spending months at sea with little food, clean water, or proper medical care. All around you, sailors fall ill and die, and the living are forced to work long hours in cramped and unsanitary conditions. Escape seems impossible until one day a pirate ship appears on the horizon offering a chance for freedom. What would you do in this situation? Would you risk everything to escape the horrors of your current vessel, or would you stay put and hope for the best? These men faced this exact choice, and many decided that piracy, with its promise of better treatment and a chance for adventure, was worth the risk. It wasn't just the conditions on board that drove men to piracy, though. Many were also motivated by the allure of treasure and adventure. Stories of pirates plundering vast fortunes and living lives of luxury were common, and it's no wonder that many sailors were tempted by the promise of riches beyond their wildest dreams. The idea of exploring uncharted waters, battling fierce storms and discovering new lands was also appealing to some who saw piracy as a way to break free from the monotony of life on a merchant ship. While the dangers were great, the potential rewards were even greater, and many men gambled everything on a life of piracy in the hopes of striking it rich. Piracy may have seemed like an easy way out for some, but the reality was far different. While some pirates did indeed live lives of luxury, most struggled to survive. Attacks on merchant ships were risky, and there was no guarantee of success. And even when pirates captured a ship, the loot was not always as valuable as hoped. Many pirates found themselves fighting for scraps, with little to show for their hard work and danger. Despite the hardships though, some sailors continued to seek their fortune on the high seas, driven by a combination of desperation and greed. For many sailors, the decision to turn pirate was a difficult one, made under duress and driven by desperation. While some may have chosen piracy for the adventure, most were simply trying to escape a life of misery and hardship. As we sail through the rough seas of history, it's important to remember that not all pirates were born into it. Some were forced into it. Life aboard a pirate ship was not all rum and revelry as portrayed in tales. It was a gritty, unforgiving existence that demanded courage, skill, and resilience. New recruits were thrown into the deep end with little guidance, expected to learn quickly and adapt to the unforgiving realities of life at sea. The allure of adventure and the promise of riches drew many to piracy, but it was the desperate circumstances that forced others to take such a perilous path. Pirates were not just swashbuckling adventurers, but ordinary men driven by extraordinary circumstances. So the next time you hear a pirate tale, remember that behind every adventure lies a story of survival, struggle, and the relentless pursuit of a better life. But enough about the hardships of life as a sailor. Now it's time to talk about the most challenging part of being a pirate, capturing other ships. It was no easy feat, requiring skill, strategy, and a whole lot of luck. One of the most difficult aspects of capturing other ships was the element of surprise. Pirates had to find a way to get close enough to their target without being detected. This meant planning ahead, scouting for vulnerabilities, and staying one step ahead of their prey. It was a delicate balance, and one wrong move could jeopardize the entire mission. Another challenge was the logistics of the attack itself. Pirates had to coordinate their efforts, timing their strikes carefully to ensure success. It required teamwork, discipline, and a deep understanding of naval tactics. The slightest miscommunication could throw the entire operation into chaos, leaving the pirates vulnerable to attack. And let's not forget about the weather. Storms, high winds, and treacherous waves could easily derail even the most carefully laid plans. Pirates had to be prepared for anything, adjusting their strategies and tactics as needed to overcome any obstacle. But perhaps the greatest challenge of all was the human element. Pirates had to contend with rival crews, unpredictable targets, and the ever-present threat of capture themselves. It was a high-risk, high-reward game, and only the most skilled and cunning pirates could hope to succeed. We've only just scratched the surface of what it took to capture another ship. There were so many factors that had to come together perfectly for a successful attack. And let's face it, most of the time things didn't go according to plan. Thanks for joining us on this episode of our Pirate Stories. We hope you enjoyed learning more about the harsh realities of life as a pirate and the challenges they faced in capturing other ships. It's easy to romanticize the swashbuckling adventures of pirates, but it's important to remember that their lives were full of hardships and dangers. If you want to learn more about the golden age of piracy, be sure to check out our channel where we have plenty of episodes on the infamous Pirates of the Caribbean and beyond. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed this episode. We'd love to have you back for more swashbuckling adventures in the next one. Until then, keep sailing the high seas, mateys, and remember, life is like the ocean, full of adventure and mystery. Just don't forget to bring plenty of life, boys. Aye, matey. The horrible life of pirates you wouldn't survive. Chapter 3: Cramped and Rotten Ships. I'm reading from The Republic of Pirates by Colin Woodard. This is Chapter 3, Cramped and Rotten Ships. It was not easy living on a pirate ship. Although they had captured and commissioned fine vessels like the Ranger and the Royal Fortune, the vast majority of ships used by the Republic of Pirates were cramped and rotten. Most were old and leaky, having been neglected by their former owners, merchants who prized profits over safety. Many were so sluggish and unstable that they were referred to as land ships. Imagine a tall, lean fellow like myself crammed into a space the size of a closet with 50 other men. We are shoulder to shoulder, elbow to elbow, lying down, sitting up or trying to move about. I'd like to have my own corner, but it ain't gonna happen here. Some will lie below deck on their backs with their heads propped up on gunwale knees, while others will perch on the edge of the deck, dangling their legs into the bilge water, all the while swapping stories and singing songs. The lucky ones will find a barrel or two to curl up in, but we're mostly just stacked up together, man to man, cheek to cheek. There may be a moment when one man is chosen for watch duty, and he climbs the mast to take his place at the bowsprit, but there is no privacy. There is barely even room to sleep. The closest thing to solitude is the bottom of a barrel, where a man can retreat to get out of the way. But even then he will be surrounded by the stench of stale waste and chamber pots. Food rots in barrels at the bottom of the hold. Foul water is stored in casks made of pitch pine. When it rains, water spills through the rotted seams, and because of the dense growth of masts and rigging, not a drop of rain falls on the deck without also dripping down into the hold, making everything wet, slimy and ripe for molding. In the stifling darkness of the crowded hold, a lone rat scurries past an open barrel, its beady eyes reflecting the faint light filtering down from the deck above. It twitches its whiskers, sniffing the salty air, before darting back into the shadows. In the dim oil lamp light, another rat darts across the deck, disappearing into the gloom of the forecastle. Rats and cockroaches scurry between the feet of the crew members, feasting on scraps of food and making themselves at home in the warm, dark spaces below deck. Cockroaches are everywhere, crawling over the filth and grime of the low quarters. They scuttle across the deck, hiding in the rigging and swarming over any food left unattended. A pirate who wants to eat dinner must first battle the roaches for his supper. Sometimes they swarm over a sleeping pirate, biting him awake with painful nips. In such close quarters, lice thrive, crawling over the filthy bodies of the pirates and laying their eggs in their hair and beards. Fleas leap from the mangy dogs onto the bare arms and necks of the crew, biting and sucking their blood. Bedbugs hide in the cracks of the barrels and furniture, only to emerge at night and sink their beaks into the exposed skin of sleeping pirates. Mosquitoes breed in the stagnant water that collects in the scuppers, under the planks of the deck, and in the bilge. The buzzing insects rise in great clouds from the swamp below deck and attack the bare arms, hands and faces of the unsuspecting pirates. At night, the sounds of the scurrying rats and cockroaches are joined by the moans of the sick and dying. If someone is taken ill with fever, dysentery, or wounds gone gangrenous, he will likely die within a few days. If he survives, he will probably lose an eye or both eyes, an arm or both arms, a leg or both legs. Anything is possible. Once a pirate has lost an eye, arm, or leg, he will be carried below deck to await death or rescue. The survivor may beg his mates to throw him overboard, but more often than not, he remains below until he is dead. If he lives long enough, he will infect every other pirate aboard the ship. Soon half the crew is below deck, either dead or too sick to come out. When the weather is good and the winds are at our backs, we sail fast and far. We sing and dance on deck. Life is not so bad. But when the storms come, life is miserable. Storms batter us for days on end. Lightning splits the sky and crashes around us. Thunder shakes the ship and rattles our bones. Waves pound the deck and threaten to engulf us. Winds scream and whistle, tearing at our clothes, our hair, our very skin. In the cramped space below deck, the rocking of the ship becomes a torture. Men holding onto each other for dear life slide off their barrels and bruise themselves against the hard wood of the hold. Most of the time, though, the winds are fair and the seas are calm. We hoist the sails and steer south toward calmer seas. There is nothing quite like running free before the wind with the sun beating down on your face, the spray of the ocean on your arms and the song of the waves in your ears. For those few moments when we are sailing fast, free and full of the spirit of adventure, life aboard a pirate ship is sweet indeed. Now we come to love our cramped and rotten ship. We repair her leaky hull with loving care and make her swift and nimble with constant scrubbing and cleaning. We mend our sails and brace our masts, ready to run from danger or chase after treasure. Our ship is our home, our floating world, and we defend her with our lives. We launch the longboat. The other pirates, they crowd into the small boat. I do not go with them. Instead, I stay on the ship to keep her safe. Our ship is like a second skin to me now. She is a part of me. I know her every creak and groan, every rise and fall. I can feel her shuddering beneath me, her timbers sighing and shifting. When the sea is calm, she is steady and sure. When the storm comes, she is wild and dangerous. I am safe on board our ship. though the other pirates pray that I am wrong. Our ship is a floating city. She carries within her all the trappings of civilization, cabins and kitchens, workshops and stores. She has everything a pirate could need to live in comfort. All he has to do is find a way to pay for it. The officers live in relative luxury in their cabins, eating well and drinking strong rum. But the common pirates, they live below deck in cramped and dirty conditions. Their cabins are dark and dank, their beds are straw pallets, and their food is whatever they can catch or steal. The officers try to keep order among the common pirates, but sometimes the men get restless and fight breaks out. The air grows thick with the smell of sweat and urine, the men are dirty and lice-ridden, and when the ship is tossed about in heavy seas, they are thrown into heaps upon the floor. The captain tries to keep order on the ship, but he is often absent from the deck, leaving the first mate to handle day-to-day operations. The first mate is responsible for navigation, but he relies on the pilot for actual piloting. Pilots are experts in navigation who can read the stars and follow the currents. They are hired for short periods of time and then dismissed once they are no longer needed. Sometimes the ship is without a pilot and the crew is forced to sail blindly, hoping for the best. This is especially dangerous in unfamiliar waters where reefs and shoals can wreck the ship. The quartermaster is in charge of supplies, but he is usually too busy counting his treasure to worry about anything else. The cook prepares meals for the crew, but he is often too drunk to do much of anything. The ship's doctor tends to the sick and wounded, but he has little to offer most of the time. The men are expected to swab the decks and climb the rigging, but many would rather walk the plank than do either of those jobs. The cabin boy does chores for the officers, and he is constantly being berated for his laziness. The boatswain is in charge of the ship S-boats, and he makes sure that they are always ready for action. He also helps to lower and raise the anchor. The gunner is in charge of the ship S-cannons, and he makes sure that they are always loaded and ready to fire. The lookout keeps a sharp eye out for land, and he is responsible for sounding the alarm if anything is spotted. The helmsman steers the ship and he follows the orders of the navigator. The sails are handled by the sailmaker and his assistants, and they make sure that they are always full and taut. Life on a pirate ship is not easy. The conditions are cramped and unsanitary, and the work is hard and dangerous. But for many men, it is better than the life they could expect on land. For some, piracy is a chance to escape a life of poverty or servitude. For others, it is a way to fight back against the injustice of the government or the wealth of the elite. Whatever the reason, these men are willing to risk it all for the chance at freedom and fortune, and they cram themselves into the tightest, most disgusting ships imaginable in hopes of finding it. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to my channel. I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. The Horrible Life of Pirates You Wouldn't Survive. Chapter 4. Hunger and Thirst. Ahoy, mateys. This is Chapter 4 of our swashbuckling pirate adventure series, where we explore the untold stories of the infamous Brethren Court and their harrowing escape from the clutches of the notorious Captain Bloodworth. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you be new around these parts, so that you never miss an exciting episode of this thrilling pirate adventure. But enough about that. Let's get right back to the story. The Brethren Court finds themselves in a most perilous situation, trapped aboard the merciless ship of Captain Bloodworth. They've endured his tyrannical rule, but now they face a different kind of danger, hunger and thirst. The salty air does little to quench their burning throats, and the thought of scurvy looms over them like a dark cloud. Even the tough pirates, men who had sailed through storms and battled navies, find themselves weakened by the lack of fresh provisions. The fear of starvation and disease begins to gnaw at their resolve, testing their strength and unity as they desperately wait for their chance to strike back against their oppressors. Chapter 4, Hunger and Thirst, opens with the Brethren Court enduring the 5th day of captivity aboard the cruel ship of Captain Bloodworth. Since their capture, they'd been denied both fresh food and water, suffering the wrath of their oppressors. The pirates aboard the ship were hardened men, accustomed to the harshest conditions at sea, yet even they found themselves yearning for a taste of fresh provisions. Their bodies ached with hunger and thirst, making every moment aboard Bloodworth's vessel a torment. One of the Brethren Court, Israel Hands, known for his hearty appetite, was among the worst affected. His powerful frame, usually robust and strong, now appeared emaciated, bearing the stark marks of their dire straits. Meanwhile, the rest of the pirates aboard Bloodworth's ship were faring no better. Though their captors did provide them with salted meat, hardtack full of worms and biscuits infested with weevils, none of it alleviated their gnawing hunger. Salted meat, a staple of the pirate diet, was a necessity when fresh provisions were scarce. However, it was a far cry from the succulent meals the Brethren Court were accustomed to. The constant intake of salt also contributed to their dehydration, making their thirst even more unbearable. Hardtack, a type of hard biscuit made from flour and water, was another essential part of a pirate's rations. However, the biscuits aboard Bloodworth's ship were not only stale, but also crawling with worms, making them a less than appetizing choice. Weevils infesting the biscuits added insult to injury, their presence a testament to the poor storage conditions on the ship. Despite the unappealing offerings, the pirates were forced to consume these rations as they had no other choice. The lack of fresh food took a toll on their health, and many began to suffer from malnutrition and related ailments. Their strength ebbed away, making it harder for them to plot their escape. Yet the pirates were not only battling hunger and thirst, but also the despair that threatened to engulf them. 5 days without water was a long time, especially in the hot and humid climate of the Caribbean. Most of the pirates had resorted to drinking beer or rum to quench their thirst, hoping to drown out their sorrows and momentarily forget their plight. However, alcohol was hardly a suitable replacement for fresh water, and it offered only a temporary respite from their torment. The Brethren Court watched helplessly as their fellow pirates grew weaker, succumbing to the harsh conditions aboard Bloodworth's ship. Some fell ill, their bodies ravaged by scurvy, a disease caused by a lack of vitamin C. Others became delirious, their minds betraying them in the face of starvation. The pirates who had once exuded strength and resilience were now mere shadows of their former selves, their faces gaunt and hollow. With each passing day, the Brethren Court feared for the well-being of their comrades, knowing that death may soon claim them if they did not act swiftly. The desperation grew within them, fueling their determination to escape Bloodworth's clutches and seek their fortune elsewhere. For the pirates, survival depended on their ability to navigate the treacherous waters ahead, both physically and mentally. As they struggled to endure the hunger and thirst, they clung to the hope of a brighter future, a future where they could once again roam the seas as free men searching for the treasures that awaited them on the horizon. As the sun beat down on the deck of Captain Bloodworth's ship, the pirates suffered through the 6th day of captivity. The Brethren Court could no longer bear the sight of their comrades wasting away before their eyes. So they hatched a plan. Stealing some water was out of the question, as Bloodworth kept a close watch on all the supplies. Their only hope was to escape and find a new ship to take them off this cursed vessel. Meanwhile, the absence of fresh water had taken a toll on Bloodworth himself. Despite having plundered numerous ships, he couldn't lay his hands on a decent bottle of rum. The Brethren Court noticed the change in his behavior, his usual boisterous laughter replaced by a sullen silence. His eyes, once filled with mischief, now held a desperate edge as he searched the horizon for a sign of land. The pirates aboard Bloodworth's ship were restless. The tension was palpable as the men whispered in hushed tones, sharing rumors and fears. Some spoke of mutiny, suggesting they should seize control of the ship and chart their own course. Others voiced their desire to surrender, hoping for a more lenient punishment than the one that awaited them on Bloodworth's ship. As night fell, casting long shadows across the deck, the Brethren Court gathered in secret. They knew that the time for stealthy planning was over. If they were to escape, they needed to act swiftly. The pirates discussed various strategies, each weighing the risks and potential rewards. Some favored a daring nighttime escape, relying on the cover of darkness to evade Bloodworth's watchful eye. Others argued for a daytime raid, aiming to strike when Bloodworth was least expecting it. The debate raged on, with emotions running high. Tempers flared as the pirates voiced their opinions, each convinced that their idea was the best. The Brethren Court listened intently, knowing that their decision would have far-reaching consequences. They had to choose a plan that maximized their chances of survival and escape. As the discussion reached its climax, Blackbeard, the infamous pirate captain, known for his cunning and bravery, stepped forward. He listened attentively to the various proposals, his mind racing with possibilities. Finally, he spoke, his voice echoing with authority. He outlined a plan that combined the elements of daytime and nighttime raids, aiming to catch Bloodworth off guard and secure their freedom. The pirates fell silent, absorbing Blackbeard's words. They saw the logic in his plan and the potential for success. It was risky, but it was their best chance at escape. With the plan in place, the pirates prepared for action. They gathered the necessary supplies, making sure they had everything they needed for their daring escape. The Brethren Court watched as their fellow pirates put the plan into action. There was a sense of camaraderie among them, a shared determination to break free from Bloodworth's clutches. They knew that the odds were stacked against them, but they were willing to take the risk. As the sun rose, casting its golden rays over the horizon, the pirates made their move. They acted with precision and speed, taking advantage of the element of surprise. Bloodworth and his crew were caught off guard, their defenses crumbling under the onslaught. The Brethren Court witnessed the chaos that ensued, the clash of swords and the shouts of men as the pirates fought valiantly for their freedom. The battle raged on, the fate of the Brethren Court hanging in the balance. The pirates faced fierce resistance, but their determination to escape propelled them forward. With every strike they drew closer to their goal, hoping to secure their freedom and chart their own course once again. The Brethren Court held their breath as the battle reached its climax. The outcome was uncertain, but their hopes for escape burned brightly. They knew that their ordeal was far from over, but with each passing moment, they felt the weight of captivity lifting. They had taken a daring stand, and their fate now rested on the edge of their swords. In the end, the pirates prevailed, their courage and unity leading them to victory. They had successfully escaped the clutches of Captain Bloodworth, leaving behind the ship that had become a symbol of their suffering. Now, with the taste of freedom on their lips, the pirates set sail on their journey to uncharted waters, eager to write their own story and forge their own destiny on the vast expanse of the open sea. And there they have it, mateys, the perilous journey of the Brethren caught through hunger and thirst aboard the cruel ship of Captain Bloodworth. What will our swashbuckling heroes do next? Will they find a new ship to continue their adventure, or will they fall prey to the unforgiving seas? Stay tuned to find out in the next chapter of our swashbuckling pirate adventure series. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe so that you'd never miss an exciting episode. Until then, keep on truckin', me hearties, and I'll catch ye on the flip-flop side. Chapter 5: The Shadow of Scurvy. For the first mate and his crew, life on the high seas was all about the long haul. Days, weeks, even months would pass without seeing land. When that happened, there was no way to get fresh fruits and vegetables. They had to rely on what they could carry with them, and for sailors, the most important thing was to have something to do with their time. That's why many of them spent so much time gambling. They just couldn't sit around twiddling their thumbs for days on end. Unfortunately, that lack of fresh food took its toll on their bodies. One of the worst things that could happen to a sailor was to contract scurvy. It started with red gums that would soon blacken and rot. It loosened the teeth and made the body weak. It was a horrible way to die, and it was a slow death, which was the worst part. There was no cure for it. While your comrades would watch you slowly die, knowing that there was nothing they could do to help. Now, there were other things that could kill you on a ship, but scurvy was the most common. It was caused by a lack of vitamin C, and that's what killed the most sailors. When someone came down with scurvy, it was like watching a horror movie. Their gums would first start to bleed, then the teeth would fall out. They'd become so weak that they couldn't move their arms or legs, and then they'd keel over and die right in front of everyone. Some sailors tried to avoid eating the rotten fruit, but it wasn't easy. If you didn't eat enough fruit, you'd get scurvy. And if you ate too much, well, you'd have to face the other dangers of the rotten fruit. Some sailors preferred to take their chances with the scurvy. They just couldn't stomach the thought of eating that foul fruit. It was bad enough having to clean the latrines, but when someone got sick with scurvy, you had to clean up their waste, too. You might think that you're strong enough to resist eating the rotten fruit, but the truth is, you'll probably end up eating it anyway. It just takes one person on the ship to get sick with scurvy, and before you know it, you're all eating that nasty fruit together. The author sure knows how to make a guy feel queasy. Just thinking about those juicy mangoes makes me want to hurl, and the thought of those worms squirming in my stomach, ugh, it's enough to give me goosebumps. But listen, we've got to do what we've got to do. If we don't, those pesky limes will take us down. Stay tuned for more tales of the high seas. Chapter 5: The Shadow of Scurvy. When my brother and I decided we were going to run away to sea, it was with grand dreams of adventure and discovery. What we didn't know was that the world would be our oyster. Unfortunately, it also had its own very unflattering ways of keeping boys in their place. It started with Chapter 4, where we almost died of starvation. And now this, Chapter 5, where we will die of something else. My journal starts today with, "Long may you live and long may you roam, but don't expect any fruit or veg along the way." That sounds like a threat, but it's only half a joke. See, we have been out here at sea for over 2 weeks. We left Plymouth on April, and by May we are nearing the Azores, a cluster of islands about halfway between Portugal and the United States. But even though we can see land on the horizon, there is no joy in our camp. Instead, fear of scurvy. It seems there are two things that sailors fear most: running out of food and running out of fruit and vegetables. Without fresh fruit and vegetables, your body slowly begins to fall apart. You get bad gums, your teeth start to fall out, your skin starts to crack and bleed. Your muscles become weak. You become very sick and then you die. This is how we feel right now. For the past 2 weeks, all we've had to eat is hardtack and salt pork. Hardtack is a type of ship's biscuit made of flour, water, and salt. These biscuits are so hard that they have to be soaked overnight in water or milk before they can be eaten. And that's what we're doing now. We take our biscuits and plunge them into the sea. In the morning, we pull them out, lay them on the deck and wait. Then, when we think they're ready, we break them open and gobble them down with some water. This is better than nothing, but it doesn't really taste good. It just kind of tastes like dirty socks. I know you're thinking, well, why don't you just catch some fish and you'll have protein and you won't die? But it's not that easy. First off, catching fish is hard work, and we are so weak and hungry that it takes a lot of effort just to get out of bed each morning. But second, and perhaps most important, if you're low on vitamin C, which we are, you cannot absorb iron. Iron is what makes red blood cells. If you don't have enough iron, it's harder for your body to transport oxygen to your muscles, so even if we caught fish, we wouldn't have the strength to reel them in. The first sign of scurvy is swollen gums. I can feel mine swelling up already. Next comes loose teeth. Then it's bleeding gums. Then it's loss of appetite. Then it's weakness, depression, fever, bad breath, spots in the skin, bleeding gums again, and then death. There is no cure. As the journal says, long may you live and long may you roam, but don't expect any fruit or veg along the way. The truth is, we are slowly dying out here at sea. My brother and I look at each other and we ask the same question without saying anything. Is this the end of the adventure? Are we really going to die out here? I don't want to. I'm only 17 years old. I still have so much to learn and see. But there is nothing we can do. There are no lemons or oranges on the high seas. The closest thing we have is limes. Limes are a little bit better, but they are very sour and we don't know how to use them. Maybe if we squeeze the juice from the limes onto our food, it will help. Or maybe if we boil the limes, will that help? No one knows because no one has ever done it before. On the 22nd of May, we reached the Canary Islands. They are beautiful, lush, green, and filled with all kinds of fruit. We drop anchor and go ashore to stock up. But before we know it, we are arrested for stealing fruit. Apparently, the Spanish colonial government does not allow people to harvest fruit from the wild. It must be grown on private land. So we spend the night in jail and leave the next morning with only 1 apple and a few oranges. We need more fruit and we need it fast. We are too weak to catch fish. We are too weak to harvest fruit. We are too weak to do anything. All we can do is sit here and wait for our bodies to fall apart. The journal says, "Beware the fruit of the devil, for they are sweet to the tongue but bitter to the end." I thought these were the Canary Islands, not the Cape Verde Islands. But looking back, I realize we did come from the Cape Verde Islands. We came from Sal Island. Sal Island is known for having the best beaches in the world, white sand, crystal clear water, palm trees. But we didn't see any of that. We only saw rocks and dirt and wind. But even if we were in paradise, it wouldn't help, because we are cursed. We are cursed to wander the earth without ever finding fresh fruit or vegetables, not a single juicy apple, not a single crunchy carrot, not a single crunchy carrot, not a single luscious strawberry, nothing. All we can do now is wait for the inevitable. The journal says, slowly but surely, scurvy will take hold. Your gums will swell, your teeth will fall out, your skin will turn yellow, and your eyes will pop out of your head. Okay, maybe that last part isn't true, but the rest is. Each day we get weaker. Each day it gets harder to get out of bed. Each day we have to spend more time resting. Soon, getting out of bed becomes impossible. One by one my teeth begin to fall out. Then my gums begin to swell. Then my skin begins to crack and bleed. I can barely walk anymore. I drag myself around the deck trying to find some kind of fresh fruit or vegetable, but there is nothing here. All I see is ocean. I can see land in the distance, but we are too far away to sail there, and besides, there is nothing there for us anyway. All we would find is more scurvy, more scurvy. There is nothing but scurvy in this world. We have been wandering for months. We are tired. We are hungry. We are sick. We just want it to be over. And then, just when we think it can't get any worse, it does. A storm, a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad storm. We are tossed about the ocean like a cork in a whirlpool. Waves crash over the deck, soaking us to the bone. The wind howls like a banshee. The rain pours down in sheets. Lightning flashes and thunder roars. The sky turns black as night. The ocean boils and churns. The mast creaks and groans. The sails flap and bang. Everything is loud and violent and wet. In the middle of the chaos, my brother grabs me by the shoulder and screams in my ear. I'm scared, and I want to tell him everything will be okay, but I can't, because I am scared too. And then he screams again, louder this time, "Help me," and I can't help him. There is nothing I can do. I am too weak. I am dying. What happens next? I don't know. I pass out and wake up to the sound of voices. They're talking about us. They say we look like ghosts. They say we shouldn't have gone out to sea. They say we're lucky to be alive. They're taking us off the boat and putting us in beds. They bring us food and water. They give us medicine. They say we're gonna be fine. I don't know who they are or where we are, but it doesn't matter. I am saved. I am alive. I am cured. I look up at the sky and I say, "Thank you. Thank you for giving me another chance. Thank you for saving my life." Now, I don't know if you believe in fate or destiny, but I do. I believe that we were meant to go on this journey. I believe that we were meant to face our fears. I believe that we were meant to discover new lands and new cultures. I believe that we were meant to experience all that life has to offer, both the good and the bad. I believe that we were meant to be shipwrecked and survive. I believe that we were meant to wander the earth and be cured. I believe that we were meant to go on this journey together. I believe that we were meant to write this journal. You can call me Ishmael. Welcome to the series. We're gonna start off this mini-series with some fun facts about Chapter 6, The Filth of Disease. There's a total of 20 fun facts. So let's just get started. Number 1. During the golden age of piracy, ships were basically floating hospitals. They would carry all sorts of diseases and illnesses that could kill people. This was especially true during long voyages when the conditions on board the ship would become unsanitary and cramped. One of the most common diseases that would spread on these ships was dysentery, which is an infection of the intestines that causes diarrhea and stomach pain. It could be spread through contaminated food or water, which was often scarce on pirate ships. Another disease that was common on pirate ships was fever, which could be caused by a variety of different factors, such as poor ventilation, lack of clean water, and exposure to the elements. One of the most deadly diseases that could strike a pirate ship was plague, which was a bacterial infection that could cause fever, weakness, and buboes or painful swellings of the lymph nodes. The plague was often spread by rats, which were known to carry the disease. On crowded pirate ships, it was easy for the disease to spread quickly among the crew, resulting in a mass outbreak. No, 2 pirates didn't bathe. I mean, who has time to bathe when you're busy plundering and pillaging? But seriously, folks, it's a rare sight to find pirates taking a dip in the ocean, even after weeks at sea. The lack of hygiene was not only due to their busy schedule, but also due to their belief that water would make them more vulnerable to attacks. They also believed that bathing would wash away their protective spirits. Instead of bathing, pirates would use a strong-smelling perfume to mask their odors, which might have actually attracted more trouble than it was worth. 3. Pirates reeked of stale waste and rotting food. Pirates lived in a state of filth and squalor that would make even the most hardened sailor turn up his nose. The combination of stale waste and rotting food created an olfactory assault that could be detected from miles away. It wasn't uncommon for pirates to go without fresh food for days on end, relying instead on whatever they could scavenge from their victims or what they caught while fishing. And when the food did arrive, it often wasn't cooked properly, leading to outbreaks of food poisoning and other illnesses. 4. A pirate's clothes were as dirty as their fingernails. They wore them until they literally fell apart. Pirates were known to wear the same clothes until they were so dirty and tattered that they looked like rags. The golden age of piracy took place in the Caribbean and the Indian Ocean, where the climate was hot and humid. This made it even more unpleasant for pirates to wear the same clothes for extended periods of time. 5. Fleas were a common problem for pirates. They infested their clothing and bedding, causing discomfort and spreading disease. Pirates were too poor to buy bug spray or to have their clothing cleaned, so the fleas were able to thrive on their ships. The fleas were also able to feed on the rats that carried the plague, so the fleas were helping to spread that disease as well. 6. Wounded pirates often died from infection, not the injury itself. Even a small cut or bruise could turn deadly if it became infected. Pirates were not very clean when it came to treating their wounds. They would often just put a bandage over it without properly cleaning the wound first. This would allow bacteria to enter the wound and cause it to become infected. 7. Pirates were buried at sea to prevent the spread of disease. When a pirate died on a ship, they would often be buried at sea to prevent the spread of disease. This was especially true if the pirate had died from a contagious illness like plague. The body would be wrapped in a weighted blanket or barrel and then thrown into the ocean. This practice was also done by other sailors during the Age of Discovery, not just pirates. 8. Many pirates died from drinking contaminated water. Pirates often drank from rivers and streams to stay hydrated. Unfortunately, this water was often contaminated with human and animal waste, making the pirates sick. Some pirates even died from drinking water that was contaminated with the plague. 9. Pirates would share their water with their fellow crew members, even if they were sick. This is because water was a precious commodity, and the pirates needed all the help they could get to stay alive. Water was often scarce on pirate ships, especially during long voyages. This meant that the pirates had to ration their water carefully and make sure that everyone on the ship stayed hydrated. Number 10. Pirates preferred rum to water because it could be stored longer. Rum was also seen as a way to boost the crew's morale and keep them happy, which was important for the success of the ship. However, this led to many pirates becoming alcoholics. Number 11. In addition to the lack of proper sanitation, pirates also suffered from a lack of medical knowledge. Most pirates were illiterate and had little understanding of how the human body worked. This meant that they were unable to properly treat injuries or illnesses, which often resulted in infections and deaths. Number 12. Pirates had no respect for human life. They were willing to do whatever it took to get what they wanted, including killing innocent people. This disregard for human life made it easier for them to dispose of bodies without a second thought. 13. If a pirate ship ran out of water, the crew would resort to drinking salty ocean water. This, of course, would dehydrate them even further and make them very sick. Some pirates even died from drinking salty ocean water. Number 14. Pirates often plundered on other ships for food and water. When a pirate ship came across another vessel, they would often attack it and steal its supplies, including food and water. This was especially important for pirate ships that were low on supplies. Number 15. Pirates sometimes attacked coastal settlements for fresh water. Coastal settlements usually had access to fresh water sources such as rivers and wells. Pirates would attack these settlements and force the residents to give them water. They would then take the water back to their ship and drink it. Number 16. Pirates would use rainwater to supplement their water supply. When it rained, pirates would do their best to collect the rainwater. They would use containers of all shapes and sizes to collect the water, including barrels, buckets, and even gourds. Number 17. Pirates kept livestock on their ships, such as goats and pigs, which provided them with fresh meat and milk. These animals were also a source of water, as pirates would slaughter them and then drink their blood. Or maybe not everyone, but some pirates did this. Number 18. Pirates would fish while at sea to supplement their food supply. They would use whatever tools they had available to catch fish, including hooks, spears, and nets. Fishing was an important source of protein for pirates, especially during long voyages when their food supplies were low. Number 19. Pirates would raid coastal settlements for food. When pirates weren't out at sea, they would often raid coastal settlements for food and other supplies. They would target settlements that had fresh fruit, vegetables, and livestock. Number 20. Pirates were willing to risk everything for a chance to plunder a Spanish galleon. These galleons were known to carry vast amounts of treasure and other riches that pirates coveted. The risks were high, however, as Spanish galleons were heavily armed and protected. So there you have it. 20 fun facts about Chapter 6, The Filth of Disease. Hope you learned something new and found it entertaining. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this one. Until next time, welcome back everyone to the high seas, where the only law is the one that's written in blood. Today we're diving into Chapter 7 of our swashbuckling pirate saga. Remember, if you join our crew today, you can help shape the story and get access to exclusive content. Let's set sail with Chapter 7, Brutal Pirate Discipline. The salty winds of the Caribbean carry more than just the scent of adventure. They also whisper tales of legendary pirates like Blackbeard and Captain Kidd, men who plundered untold riches and lived lives of supposed freedom and debauchery. But what if these infamous tales only tell half the story? What if behind the legend of the Jolly Roger there's a darker secret lurking? Welcome aboard, matey. I'm your guide to the 7 seas of storytelling, and together we dive deep into this swashbuckling world where the only law is the one written in blood. But before we weigh anchor, remember to join our crew. It's free and you'll get access to our secret stash where we share exclusive content and let you, our valued viewers, help shape the story. So are you ready to embark on this thrilling journey alongside me? Good, then, let's set sail for uncharted waters. In the heart of the golden age of piracy, fear is a weapon as sharp as any cutlass and as valuable as any jewel in the crown of the Spanish Main. On the decks of a pirate ship, life is a gamble and death is always lurking around the corner. Every pirate, from the lowly cabin boy to the most seasoned first mate, knows that the captain is not just their leader, but also their final judge, jury, and executioner. Captains like Blackheart feared for their ruthlessness. Stories of his wrath still echo across the seven seas. Rumor has it that he once marooned a member of his crew on a desert island for nothing more than suggesting that their course was off. On the open sea, respect is earned through strength and submission. Captains wield their power like a sharp blade, ready to strike fear into the hearts of those who defy them. Loot is king on the high seas, but disobey the captain and you'll find yourself walking the plank without a doubt. Imagine the scene, the rocking waves, the salty spray of the ocean, the creak of the ship beneath your feet. You're standing at the edge of the deck, the plank protruding from the side of the ship like an outstretched hand of fate. The captain, his face a mask of grim determination, stands behind you, a cutlass glinting in his hand. A single wrong move, a hesitant step, and you're plunged into the unforgiving embrace of the sea. The water temperature, a shocking contrast to the burning fear that courses through your veins. You thrash and splutter, but there's no mercy here. The ocean is a relentless beast, eager to claim another soul. As you struggle to keep your head above the waves, the ship begins to drift away the faces of your fellow pirates, growing smaller and smaller until they disappear from view, leaving you alone in the vast expanse of the ocean with only the circling seagulls and the mocking laughter of the waves. Pirates were men and women who valued their freedom above all else. But within the close-knit community of a pirate ship, discipline reigned supreme. Loot and plunder were the lifeblood of piracy, but stealing from your fellow crew members was a crime punishable by the harshest of punishments. Loot was sacred on a pirate ship. Each man worked hard to acquire it, facing dangers and battling enemies to bring the treasure aboard. To steal from your fellow crew members was seen as a betrayal of trust and a violation of the bond that held the crew together. The pirate code demanded that every member of the crew shared in the spoils fairly, and any who strayed from this path faced the consequences. If caught red-handed, a thief could expect nothing less than a swift and brutal punishment, often at the hands of the entire crew. It was a stark reminder that on a pirate ship, trust was hard-earned and easily broken. Chapter 6 ended with a taste of victory as Captain Flint and his crew captured a galleon laden with treasure. The celebrations were short-lived, however, as the true test of leadership was about to begin. Among the captives was Don Diego, a wealthy Spanish noble who had more than mere riches at stake. He had insulted the captain deeply, calling him and his men scum of the earth. This insult cut like a whip, and the captain seethed with barely restrained fury. Now the question was how to make Don Diego pay. The crew, fresh from their victory and drunk on the promise of plunder, wanted immediate retribution. They demanded the captain punish Don Diego severely. The clash between the crew's bloodlust and the captain's strategic mind created a storm of tension on the ship. As the debate raged on the deck, a new character entered the fray, Isabella. She had been rescued from the galleon, and while not a pirate herself, she was no damsel in distress. Her intelligence and quick thinking had already made her a valuable asset to the crew. Now she found herself at the center of a brewing mutiny. The crew, intoxicated by their recent success and eager for more plunder, urged the captain to execute Don Diego right away. Their anger and thirst for revenge threatened to consume them, but the captain remained resolute, determined to hold firm against their bloodlust. In the midst of this escalating conflict, the captain's first mate, the ever-loyal John Silver, stepped forward. His voice, seasoned by years at sea, boomed over the din of the crowd. He understood both the crew's desire for vengeance and the captain's need for strategy. Silver argued passionately for a more measured response, urging restraint and reminding them that executing Don Diego would only earn them the enmity of the Spanish nobility. While his crewmates shouted back, Silver refused to back down. He stood his ground, defending the captain's authority and the importance of thinking beyond the heat of the moment. As the debate reached its peak, the captain took a deep breath, trying to restore order among his unruly crew. His eyes, hardened by years of hardship and high adventure, scanned the faces of his men. He saw their bloodlust, but he also recognized their potential for greatness. With a voice that boomed over the noise, he commanded silence. When order was restored, the captain addressed his crew, outlining why he couldn't fulfill their demands. His reasoning was straightforward and practical. He needed Don Diego alive for leverage. The nobleman's connections and wealth meant he could negotiate for a hefty ransom, ensuring the crew's future fortunes. Plus, he reminded them, executing Don Diego wouldn't solve their larger problems. The Spanish Navy was on their trail and they needed allies, not enemies. Despite the captain's firm resolve, a faction of the crew remained unconvinced. Led by a hot-headed pirate named One-Eyed Jack, these men demanded action. They wanted to plunder the galleon, revel in their spoils, and then send the Spanish noble to his grave. This growing division threatened to tear the crew apart, plunging the ship into chaos just as it had achieved victory. The tension thickened on the ship as the captain prepared to leave without the dissenting pirates. He knew the risk of mutiny was real, but he was willing to take it rather than compromise his principles. Before sailing away, he left a final message for the mutineers, a challenge. He would return in 3 days. If they hadn't changed their minds by then, he would have no choice but to treat them as enemies. With that, he turned and strode towards his ship, leaving the mutineers seething on the dock. The scene shifts to the mutineers led by the hot-tempered One-Eyed Jack. After the captain's departure, they divided the captured loot amongst themselves. A hollow victory that did little to ease their frustration. 3 days passed, each hour bringing them closer to the captain's return. Tension mounted, creating a heavy cloud over the group. They watched anxiously as the appointed day approached, knowing they'd soon face the consequences of their actions. As the third day dawned, the pirates braced for the showdown. They knew the captain would return soon, and with him, the possibility of reconciliation or bloodshed. The approaching sound of cannons broke the tense silence. The crew of the ship appeared on the horizon, their sails billowing in the wind. As the ships drew closer, the mutineers' anxiety grew, their earlier bravado fading in the face of the inevitable. And there you have it, mateys. Another thrilling chapter in our swashbuckling tale. What will the outcome be when the captain returns and confronts the mutineers? Will there be a resolution or a battle? You'll have to join us next time to find out. Until then, walk the plank of imagination and dive into the ocean of anticipation. What do you think will happen next? Join the conversation in the comments below. Your thoughts could shape the next chapter. And don't forget, if you've got a heart for adventure and a thirst for more swashbuckling tales, hit that subscribe button. It's your ticket to a world of high seas, heroic deeds, and hidden treasures. We've got more stories waiting to be unfolded, and I, your guide to the 7 seas of storytelling, invite you to stay tuned. Together, we'll weather every storm, discover every hidden isle, and plunder every sea monster that stands in our way. So raise the colors high, me hearties, and prepare for more adventures, because the journey's just begun. Until we meet again on the high seas, keep an eye out for krakens, and may your treasure be plentiful. Until then. Oh great, just what I wanted to hear. More fighting. How much more fighting could one person take? It's not like I enjoyed it or anything, but at this point in my life, I'd heard enough war stories to fill an entire library. And that's what these were, just stories. But they were exciting stories, ones that made me feel like I was right there with them fighting alongside my friends. Of course, the real thing was never quite as glamorous as their stories made it out to be. The first time I'd actually attacked a ship, I'd been terrified. There was smoke, fire, screams, and blood everywhere. The smell of roasting meat hung heavy in the air, but it wasn't the kind you wanted to eat. We'd won that battle, but only by the slimmest of margins. Some of my closest friends had died. Others had taken injuries that would leave them scarred for life. Some of those injuries had taken their lives within hours of our victory. It had been a massacre. One of the other sailors had said so afterward. A massacre, he'd repeated, shaking his head. A damn massacre. Now, as we set sail once again, I watched the other men and tried to work out how many of them would die this time. Would I survive? What if I took an injury that meant I never walked again? I was useless without my legs. My fingers tightened on the railing until my knuckles went white. Then I forced myself to relax. Thinking about all the things that could go wrong, all the bad things that could happen, was just going to make things worse. I knew this, but still I did it. And even though I knew it wasn't rational, I could unhelp but wonder if maybe if I thought hard enough about all the worst-case scenarios, I could somehow will the universe to avoid them. The reality was that I had no control over any of it. All I could do was my best and hope it was enough. But where was the fun in that? Where was the glory? As a kid, when I listened to the old salts spinning their yarns, I never worried about the danger. I didn't think about the injuries or the death. I just imagined myself as a dashing hero, fighting off scurvy dogs, taking down enemy ships and coming out on top. But the truth was that I hadn't really had a choice in the matter. I'd been born into it. I was a sailor. It was all I knew. And in a way, I guess, I kinda liked it. I mean, I wouldn't trade it for the world. But sometimes I wished I could have chosen something else. Like imagine being a cobbler. You get to spend your days working on simple tasks, making shoes and mending boots. You don't have to worry about running out of food or water or rum. You don't need to fear the next sunrise because it might be your last. You don't have to worry about taking an injury that means you never walk again. Or that maybe your legs get chopped off and you end up living the rest of your life on the charity of others. A cobbler is a simple life, nothing like the life of a sailor. No wonder Finn had chosen to become one. He'd traded in the uncertainty of the open sea for the calm of the land. Now he lived a safe, boring life in a small village. He had a house, a wife, kids, and probably a dog or two. He was probably happy, too. I hoped he was. I hoped he didn't regret what he'd left behind, because sometimes I did. And here I was, back out on the endless ocean once again, having traded my chance at happiness for this. Sometimes I felt like the ocean was my home. I knew its moods, its temperaments, its strengths, its weaknesses. I knew the language of the waves. But lately, I'd been feeling like a stranger to it. I didn't feel at home anymore. In fact, every time I stepped onto the deck, I felt like I was stepping into the unknown. The ship creaked and groaned beneath me. The waves crashed against the hull and wind tore at my clothes, and I felt utterly alone. It didn't matter that the ship was crowded with men. I could feel the emptiness around me as keenly as I could feel the rocking of the vessel beneath my feet. I wondered how long it would be before I got used to it again. Would I ever feel like I belonged out here again? Before I could dwell on it any longer, someone shouted from the crow's nest, "Land ahoy!" The lookout gave 3 short blasts on the ship's horn, and then 3 long ones. Then he shouted again, "Man the battle stations! Man the battle stations!" At his command, sailors started to run across the deck, disappearing below deck and reappearing on the quarterdeck and the forecastle. They scrambled to prepare the ship for battle. The men fell into their places instinctively, moving with practiced ease. But me, I needed some assistance with remembering what I was supposed to do. As soon as I was able, I joined them. The ship we were sailing on was a warship. Our job was to chase down other ships and destroy them. That was what we were good at. I was much less good at it than the others. The lookouts scanned the horizon, searching for our target. Suddenly, one of them cried out, "There she blows, she blows." I strained to see through the morning mist, but all I could see was a dark shape looming on the horizon. Then suddenly she loomed larger, and I realized it was a schooner. She was a prize. If we could take her, we would get her cargo, whatever that was, and we would get her sails, which we could use to repair our own. If I was honest with myself, I'd be out there chasing her too, wouldn't I? The captain bellowed orders, and the crew responded. The schooner was fast, but we were faster. Soon we were close enough to see the men on board the schooner, tense and ready for action. They'd seen us coming. The captain looked grim. This was gonna be a hard fight. I could tell by the set of his jaw. He knew it too, and then it was upon us. The battle lasted for hours. Swords clashed and men fell. Cannons boomed and sails ripped. The schooner fought hard, but we were too strong for them. Finally, the captain boarded the schooner. I followed him, gripping my sword tightly. By the time we had the schooner under control, I was covered in sweat, dirt and blood. But it was my blood. I hadn't even managed to land a single blow. I was useless, just another body slung on the deck of a ship that had already won. That night, as we feasted on the schooner's cargo, I felt proud. Maybe I was getting used to this again. Maybe I was finally starting to feel at home. But then the captain came and sat beside me. His face was grim. "We have to go after her," he said. "Who?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just stood up and walked away. I didn't want to go after her. I didn't want to fight another battle. I was tired of fighting. Couldn't we just leave her alone? Why did we have to keep doing this? He caught my eye and smiled sadly. "You'll understand soon enough," he said. "One day you'll be in charge of it all. And when that day comes, you'll know why we do what we do. For now though, just enjoy the victory. We earned it, and I did try to enjoy it. I really did. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all pointless. One day we'd win, and the next day we'd be out there trying to win again. What was the point?" The captain had an answer for that too. He said it was about freedom, about justice, about the thrill of the chase and the rush of victory. But I could tell he didn't believe it. Neither did anyone else. We all knew it was just about money, plunder, and power. The next battle was even harder. They put up a good fight, but we were better. We were stronger and smarter and meaner. We were pirates. This was what we did. After we'd finished with them, there was nothing left. The ship was burnt and destroyed. The men were dead. I felt sick and empty. Was this what my life was going to be like forever? Would I spend my days killing people who hadn't done anything to me? Would I spend my nights haunted by the ghosts of the men I killed? Was this the life I'd chosen? Because if it was, I wanted out. Then the captain laid a hand on my shoulder. "It doesn't have to be this way," he said. "You don't have to do this anymore if you don't want to. You can leave whenever you want." I looked at him, surprised. "What?" He nodded. "You heard me. You can leave any time you want." I could leave any time I wanted. I realized then that I'd been wrong. I wasn't a prisoner. I was free. But free to do what? Free to live a life of killing and pillaging. Free to roam the oceans with no home and no hope. Free to be a pirate. Well, yeah, I was free to be a pirate, but that's not what I wanted. Not anymore, anyway. I thanked the captain for everything he'd taught me. I told him I wouldn't forget him, and then I left. I found a small boat and rowed away from the others. I didn't know where I was going, but I didn't care. All I knew was that I couldn't stay there anymore. As I disappeared into the mist, I heard the sound of cannons booming and the cries of men at war. And I knew I'd never go back. Ahoy, mateys, it's me here, ready to plunder some more historical tales from the pages of a book called The Republic of Pirates by Colin Woodard. This is Chapter 9, The Wounded and the Maimed. And it's probably be one of the shorter chapters we do, because this is an absolutely grim and dark chapter. So let's just dive right into it, shall we? So here we go. There were few surgeons among the pirates and no real medicine. To patch up a wound, they would squeeze the blood out of it and then sew it up. That's pretty much what we do today when we get a cut and we put some antibiotic cream on it and then a bandage. But of course, back then, they didn't have antibiotic cream. They had none of the luxuries that we do today. And so wounds would get infected and they would fester and they would turn black and things like that. And if you didn't die of infection, you might die of something else. If they had to amputate a limb, then they would use a saw and they would do it without anesthesia. The anesthetic at the time was usually just rum. They would just pour rum down your throat until you passed out. And then they would do whatever surgeries they needed to do. Otherwise, they would just sew you up and hope for the best. A lot of pirates, unfortunately, lived long, painful and miserable lives with missing eyes, missing limbs, missing fingers. A lot of them couldn't even really see well. So they would patch one eye up, put in a glass eye. Sometimes they wouldn't even put in a glass eye. They would just leave it empty and hollow. And the pirate would have to wear a headband or something to hold the eye socket open, so that their brain would just reabsorb the empty space. And there was also another ailment that plagued the pirates called the dry rot. The dry rot was caused by mercury poisoning, which came from the way they preserved their food. If you've watched my previous videos, you know that the sailors at the time, both pirates and non-pirates, they would preserve their food with salt and then they would also use mercury bichloride as well. Well, if you ate too much of that stuff, you got mercury poisoning, and then you got the dry rot. You could also get the dry rot from sucking on those sweet buccaneer lollipops. More on that in my other videos. But this is a quote from the book describing the symptoms of the dry rot. Teeth are the first to show the effects of mercury poisoning, followed by the gums and then the bones. Bones begin to ache and then crack and break. The sufferer can shed skin like a snake, and hair and nails fall out. Gangrene sets in and the body begins to rot. Death is certain within 3 months. Now we don't really have any recorded cases of any famous pirates having died from the dry rot, but we do know that a lot of the crew members on the ships, especially the privateers, they did die from the dry rot, and we even have medical examiners who wrote about it. So it was definitely around. In terms of treating the sick pirates, they really had no idea what they were doing. They thought that the best way to cure scurvy, which was rampant on these ships, was to have the sick person eat limes. They thought that would cure them. Of course, we now know that limes actually will not cure scurvy. What you need is vitamin C, and the thing is, though limes do have vitamin C in them, but if you have to suck on the peelings of limes, you're not getting enough vitamin C to actually treat scurvy. So pirates thought they were curing their scurvy, but they really weren't. So the sick pirate would feel a little bit better, and then they would go back out to sea, and then they would get sick again, and then they would have to go through that whole lime treatment all over again. Another very common practice that they used for a lot of different ailments was giving the patient a purge. A purge was basically where they would make the patient throw up and or poop their guts out. They thought that the diseases were humors, these 4 humors, blood, phlegm, black and yellow bile, and in order to cure the disease, you just had to balance out the humors. So if you had too much blood, you had to purge that out of you. So they would make you throw up and poop your guts out. Same thing if they thought you had too much phlegm or too much bile. One last story I'll tell you before we end this episode is about Blackbeard's death. Everyone knows that Blackbeard was killed in the battle with British naval forces off the coast of North Carolina in 1718. And everyone also knows that Blackbeard was wounded 5 times during that battle, that he was stabbed 5 times with a pike and then eventually shot 5 times. Now, we have a document written by a surgeon who was there on the scene who treated Blackbeard's wounds. He said that when he brought Blackbeard aboard his ship, he had 2 flesh wounds on his hand and 1 on his leg. Then, after he brought him below deck and into a room, Blackbeard took off his coat and the surgeon saw 20 or more wounds on his body. Then he dressed all those wounds up, set his bones, gave him pain medication and everything. And then Blackbeard still wanted to go out and fight, but the surgeon talked him out of it. He told him that he was gonna die anyway. Why go out and risk dying a horrible and painful death, when you could just die a nice and easy death right here? Blackbeard agreed, and he stayed below deck, and he died. That is the end of chapter 9. And man, that was a grimdark chapter. I mean, that was just awful. Pirates definitely lived very hard and very dangerous lives, not only on the high seas, but also once they were captured. They would get tortured and they would get killed in the most horrible ways. But hey, that is why we drink to forget and we plunder to remember. Well, that's all I've got for you today, mateys. Thank you for watching. If ye like this video, please like the video, and if you want to hear more, stay tuned for more episodes of the Republic of Pirates. Until then, I'll be seeing the mateys, and remember, there be treasure in them hills. A pirate's sleep, it ain't all that sweet, matey. Chapter 10, A Pirate's Sleep, begins now on the pirate, where Jack Rackham is, to put it mildly, having trouble sleeping. He lays there staring up at the sailcloth stretched over the deck above him, which serves as a roof for this part of the ship. And it's not much of a roof, because here on the Pirate, they don't have any hammocks like the officers on the Mayflower had in chapter 6. Most of the crew sleeps right on the deck, just below the gunwale on hard planks. Now, those planks do have straw pallets on them, but it's not exactly a comfortable place to catch some shut-eye. To make matters worse, the ship is constantly rocking and rolling on the high seas. You know, being on a ship, being at sea, all that salty goodness around you, well, it rocks, it rolls, it pitches, it does all kinds of stuff. And when the ship does that, the planks move, creak, groan, and shake. Add to that the fact that the ship is old and sprung many a leak, and the planks are often wet too. Then when it rains, which it often does at sea, the water comes seeping through the timbers, soaking the straw and dripping onto your face. That doesn't exactly help a fella fall asleep, if you can imagine. Now, on top of the rocking, the rolling, the wet, leaky planks, Jack can't sleep because he's always on edge. He's always listening, always trying to hear the telltale signs of an ambush or a mutiny. He listens for the telltale creaks of men coming up the rigging, the splash of men lowering themselves into the water, the scraping of a long boat on the hull of the ship, and the sounds of the sea, the wind, the waves, the gulls. They all blend together to make an eerie symphony that plays while Jack lies there awake, and it keeps him from getting a wink of sleep. Jack knows that pirates sleep with one eye open, so to speak, even when they're lying down. They're always ready to spring into action, always ready to defend themselves against an attack, and Jack is no different. In fact, he is more on edge than most. Being captain, he has more to worry about than the other men. Not only is he responsible for piloting the ship and fighting off attacks, but he also has to watch out for his own crew. Pirates are known for turning on their captains, and Jack has seen it happen before. He's seen it happen to other crews he's been a part of, and he knows it could happen to him. One minute you're sailing along, everything's going well, and the next minute the men are shouting, "Ahoy, Captain, you're a dead man," and they're coming for you with cutlasses raised. There's only one thing to do when that happens: run. So that's what Jack does. He runs up the rigging, climbs to the crow's nest, hides up there until the men below are distracted, fighting over who will take over the ship. Sometimes the men kill each other fighting over who gets to be captain, other times they vote, but no matter how they decide it, when they're done, they usually forget about the old captain up in the crow's nest. They don't want to waste time killing him or arguing over what to do with him, they just want to get on with plundering. So Jack spends hours up there, watching the men below, waiting for them to cool off a bit, waiting for him to get his bearings again. Sometimes he stays up there for days, eating salted pork and hard biscuits, drinking vinegar and water, until the men below have settled into their new routine. And then he comes down and tries to figure out what to do next. And sometimes the men don't fight. Instead, they just sail the ship without telling him what they're doing, where they're going, why they're doing it. They take over the ship completely, and he becomes a prisoner on his own ship. All he can do is watch and wait. Watch them set sail, head away from the horizon, away from home, away from everything familiar. Wait for them to figure out what they're doing, what they're gonna do with him, what they're gonna do with the ship, with the cargo. Sometimes they release him, and sometimes they don't. Either way, it's a long wait. So Jack lays there on the wet, creaking, rolling deck, listening to the wind and the waves and the gulls, watching the sailcloth stretched taut above him, and he waits for sleep to come, if it ever does. Now, to be fair, some pirates did sleep in hammocks. In fact, some ships carried whole fleets of them, but those were the fancy ships, the ones that belonged to the wealthy pirates. Most pirate ships were like the Pirate, though, a simple, sturdy vessel with a strong deck and a good hold for cargo. There was no room for luxuries like hammocks. Besides, pirates weren't big on luxuries. They didn't need them. All they really wanted was freedom, or at least the chance to be free, and the hammock didn't get you that. Of course, there were different kinds of pirates. Some were privateers, like Captain Kidd, who were given letters of marque by kings. Letters of marque gave them permission to attack and plunder enemy ships. They were basically the king's way of saying, hey, go out there and get those bastards. Privateers often lived in relative luxury compared to other pirates. They had fancy clothes and fine food and plenty of drink. But they still had to sleep on the deck of their ships. There wasn't much room below deck for anything, let alone beds. And if they got caught, they would be executed anyway, so they might as well enjoy themselves while they could. Other pirates were just common criminals who took to the sea to escape the law. These were the guys who lived on the deck of ships like the Pirate, eating hardtack and dried meat, drinking vinegar and water, sleeping under leaky sails. They were the ones who were most likely to mutiny, and they were the ones who were most likely to be killed in battle. In the end though, it didn't matter what kind of pirate you were. If you slept on the deck of a ship, you weren't getting much rest. The rocking and rolling of the ocean, the creaking and groaning of the ship, the dripping of the sails, it was enough to keep anyone awake, and that's just the way pirates liked it. They were always ready for action, always ready to defend themselves. They knew that life on the sea was dangerous, and they weren't about to let their guard down for a second. They slept with one eye open, so to speak, always listening for the sounds of danger, always watching for the signs of attack, and if they could fall asleep at all, they dreamed of treasure and adventure, of battles won and chests filled to the brim with gold. For pirates, sleep was a luxury, but it was a luxury they couldn't afford. The author wants you to know that although this story is about pirates, it's really about more than just pirates. It's about anyone who has to live on the edge, anyone who has to be ready for anything at all times. It's about people who have no control over their lives, who have no choice but to do what they do. It's about people who are always looking for a better life, who are always searching for something more. Pirates were real people, just like you and me. They had hopes and dreams and fears and worries. They loved and they lost and they laughed and they cried. They were just like us. Only difference was, they sailed the seas. Now, if you haven't already, please follow for more swashbuckling adventures from history's greatest pirates. And until then, me hearties, here's another tale of the high seas to raise a tankard to. Ahoy mateys, it's me here with chapter 11 of the Pirate Adventures of the Caribbean. And this one, Shiver Me Timbers, is all about the storms of the ocean. But why are we telling stories about storms? Because in today's Patreon exclusive story, we got ourselves a little bit of a storm brewing, me hearties. So, if you like to see what brews, then best be heading on over to our support page right now and becoming a supporter. But for everyone else, well, it's time for chapter 11, the storms of the ocean. Now, pirates were hearty souls, no doubt about it. They liked rum, they liked women, and they liked their adventures on the high seas. But there was one thing that they feared more than any of those things, and that was a storm at sea. For while a pirate ship may have been fast and maneuverable, there was nothing that could truly stand up against the fury of the ocean, when it turned its wrath upon them. For back in the golden age of piracy, wooden ships would quite literally snap into like kindling. Their sails would be ripped clean off by the wind, and many a poor soul would find themselves washed overboard and left to the mercy of the waves. And even worse, many of these lost souls would never be seen again, vanishing beneath the waves with not even a whisper of where they might have gone. Stories of lost ships and their crews being scattered to the winds were so common, that many sailors carried personal charms or tokens with them in hopes that they would be recovered should they perish at sea. And some even went so far as to carry small waterproof chests filled with their most prized possessions, believing that they might one day wash ashore and be discovered by someone who would return them to their loved ones. Of course, others took a different approach, throwing everything they had into the sea before leaving the sinking ship themselves, hoping that the ocean would take their riches and perhaps spare their lives. But no matter how well prepared or well equipped a crew may have been, there was always something humbling about being at the mercy of the elements, knowing that your fate was in the hands of the gods of the sea. Even the most experienced sailors could only watch in awe and terror as the ocean around them turned from calm waters to a raging beast, crashing and churning with an anger that could only be described as divine. When a storm struck, every sailor on board knew that their lives were in danger. There was no time for rum, gambling, or sword fighting. It was every man for himself as they scrambled to secure themselves to the ship and batten down the hatches. The largest threat during a storm was being washed overboard and lost at sea, which was not a fate any pirate wished upon themselves. To avoid this grim end, pirates would lash themselves to the masts or coil themselves up in the rigging like monkeys in a tree. It was a terrifying ordeal, but one that was necessary to survive. And even once secured, pirates still faced the very real danger of their ship being broken apart by the storm. Waves would crash over the deck, threatening to sweep away anyone who wasn't firmly lashed down, while the wind would scream like a banshee, rattling the bones of the ship and shaking the very foundations of the mast. Of course, this wasn't all just for naught. In fact, there were times when the very same pirates who feared storms also welcomed them, for when a storm struck, it created havoc for other ships on the sea. The fierce winds and heavy rains made it difficult for ships to sail, let alone maneuver, and the rough waves made it treacherous for smaller vessels. This meant that during a storm, pirates had the upper hand. When it came to battling other ships, they could use the chaos of the storm to their advantage, hiding and ambushing their prey when visibility was low and the seas were high. The storm provided cover for their attacks, making it much harder for other ships to defend themselves against the onslaught of a pirate ship. It was almost as if the pirates had the gods of the sea on their side during these times, giving them the extra edge they needed to capture their prizes. So in a strange way, the very thing that pirates feared the most could also be the thing that gave them the greatest advantage on the battlefield. Now, let's turn our attention back to the year 1721 and the infamous pirate Blackbeard, whose name struck fear into the hearts of sailors across the Caribbean. But even he was not immune to the power of the sea. One day, Blackbeard and his crew found themselves caught in the path of a hurricane, one of the most terrifying storms that can occur in the ocean. Hurricanes are known for their powerful winds and heavy rainfall, and they can cause massive damage to ships that get caught in their path. As the storm approached, Blackbeard knew that he had to take action quickly. He ordered his crew to reef in the sails and prepare the ship for battle, but not the usual battle with another ship. This was a battle against the elements themselves. The men worked frantically to make the ship as secure as possible, lashing down everything that could be damaged by the wind and rain, bracing the cannons and strengthening the masts. But even with all their efforts, the ship was in grave danger. The hurricane hit with a vengeance, causing the ship to toss and turn in the waves like a child's toy. The wind screamed around the ship, tearing at the sails and trying to rip them from the masts. The waves crashed over the deck, threatening to swamp the ship. At one point, the ship was struck by a particularly large wave that caused it to list sharply. Men were thrown to the deck, unable to hold on to the rigging any longer. But, despite the danger, there was nothing that could be done but hold on and hope for the best. As the storm raged on, the crew struggled to keep control of the ship. The captain barked orders, trying to keep everyone focused on the task at hand, but it was a losing battle. The ship was being battered by the storm, and there was no hope of escaping the fury of the sea. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the storm began to subside. The wind and rain slowly began to calm down and the ship began to steady. As the crew looked around, they realized that they had survived the worst of the hurricane, but not without a cost. The ship had been damaged, its masts were broken and its sails were in tatters. But they were alive and that was all that mattered. Blackbeard surveyed the damage to his ship and knew that they were in trouble. The storm had taken its toll on the vessel, and they would need to make repairs quickly if they were to stay afloat. He gathered his crew and told them that they would need to drop anchor and wait for calmer weather. No point in trying to sail in these conditions. They had to take shelter and wait for the sea to calm down. Once anchored, Blackbeard and his crew got to work repairing the ship. They patched up the sails, tightened the rigging, and reinforced the masts. It was slow and dangerous work, but they had no choice but to do it, if they wanted to survive out on the open sea. While they were able to repair their ship enough to continue sailing, they knew that they were lucky to have survived the hurricane. They had faced the wrath of the sea, and lived to tell the tale. Blackbeard never forgot the power of the sea, and the respect that he had for it grew. He knew that no matter how skilled a pirate may be, there was always something humbling about being at the mercy of the elements. And that's the end of chapter 11, The Storms of the Ocean. If ye liked it, then be sure to leave us a like and a comment about what you thought below. And if ye like to continue to follow along with the adventures of Henry Every, then there's only one thing left to say. Until next time, goodbye. So this is chapter 12. And if you're new here, welcome aboard. Come for the swashbuckling adventures and stay because you can't leave. We've got a bunch of episodes right here waiting for you to watch them. So join up, have some fun. In today's episode we're looking at buried treasure, or rather the myth of buried treasure. And I'm guessing that you know where this is going. So why do we think that pirates buried their treasure? Well, there are 3 reasons really. 1, because they were selfish and greedy and didn't want to share it. 2, because they were afraid of losing their fortune to other people, maybe other pirates, maybe the Navy, and wanted to hide it away somewhere safe. And 3, because the movies told us so. The reality was actually quite different from all of those. But let me start by saying that when we talk about buried treasure, we're not talking about sunken treasure, which is something entirely different, and which in fact, the vast majority of pirate treasure was. See, pirates weren't like Smaug, the dragon from The Hobbit, who hoarded his treasure. In fact, they spent theirs pretty freely. Drink was always the first item on the shopping list when they came ashore after a good haul. So many tales tell of the pirates arriving in port and emptying taverns of their stock before moving on to the brothels. By the time they finished spending their treasure, they were usually pretty broke. A pirate's life was full of danger and hardship, and they were lucky to survive more than a few years. They did not take kindly to parting with their heads, and money was pretty close to that. They didn't bury their treasure because they were greedy. They buried it because they were afraid of being killed and losing it all, or sometimes they buried it to hide it from the authorities. Take for example, Black Bart Roberts, one of the most successful pirates who ever lived. He amassed an estimated 400 million in today's money. After a life of crime, he was captured, tried and hanged in 1722. Did he have any buried treasure? Probably not. But during his trial, the governor of Barbados asked him about a chest rumored to be filled with gold hidden somewhere on the island. Roberts denied having anything to do with any such treasure, though the story goes that afterwards he confessed to one of his fellow prisoners that the chest was really his and that it contained over 200,000 pieces of eight. There's a similar story about Henry Every, another infamous privateer whose real name was probably John Every or John Avery. He became famous for capturing the Ganjai Sawai in 1695, a treasure ship carrying the riches of the Mughal Empire. The ship and its cargo were worth an estimated 60 million in today's money. Every took his share of the plunder, including a number of chests of gold coins and a heavy pistol said to be made out of pure gold. He spent his fortune quickly on land in England, where he bought estates and titles, outfitted ships, and set himself up for life. Or at least he would have been if he hadn't lost it all, gambling. Rumor has it that he then fled to Ireland, where he spent his last days running a casino. No word on whether he had any buried treasure though. When pirates did bury treasure, it was usually for safekeeping until they could return to retrieve it, or it was to hide it from someone else, like the Spanish, who often hid their treasure when they expected an attack from the English or Dutch privateers. A famous example of this is the lost treasure of the SS Nuestra Señora de las Mercedes, which was captured by the British in 1804. She was laden with gold, silver and emeralds looted from South America. When the British realized that they couldn't sail her back to England, they began unloading the treasure onto the beach near Falmouth, intending to collect it later. But the tide rose unexpectedly and washed much of it away. Since then, rumors have persisted that the lost treasure still lies somewhere beneath the waves off the coast of Cornwall. In 2015, an Ohio-based company called Odyssey Marine Exploration announced that it had found the wreck of the Mercedes and recovered 17 tons of silver coins and 500,000 silver bars from it, but they wouldn't say where. To this day, nobody knows exactly what happened to the rest of the treasure. But what about all that gold that pirates supposedly buried and never came back for? The stuff that legends are made of. Well, there are 2 ways that this might have happened. The first is that the pirate simply forgot where he'd hidden the treasure. It was unusual for a pirate to bury something and then move on without making any record of the location. They didn't carry maps or GPS devices. After all, perhaps they thought they'd come back later only to find that they'd forgotten exactly where they were. Even if they did make a note of the location, that doesn't necessarily help us today. Many of the islands and inlets that the Caribbean pirates favored no longer exist, thanks to rising sea levels, erosion, and the shifting of sand. For example, one legend says that Henry Morgan buried treasure on Little St. James Island, which may or may not exist anymore. Another says that Blackbeard buried treasure on Great Isaac Island, which is completely underwater now. The second way that pirates lost their buried treasure was by dying. After all, most pirates died poor, with nothing to show for their years of crime but a collection of scars. And since nobody was around to claim their estate, their treasure remained where they'd put it. Now, this does sound romantic, but the reality was more gruesome than that. Usually, when a pirate died, his head was cut off and hung from the bowsprit of the ship that had captured him as a warning to other would-be miscreants. So while it's fun to imagine undiscovered pirate treasure lying in wait for us on some far-flung island, the truth is much less appealing. What may lie there is likely nothing but bones. If you want to hear more stories of adventure and swashbuckling on the high seas, then stick around for next week's episode. Coming soon to a browser near you, or perhaps you'd like to listen to some audio drama. We've got plenty of that here as well. And don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss out on any future installments. Chapter 13. The Short Life Expectancy. As mentioned in the previous episode, pirates often died violent deaths, but they also died from much more mundane causes. To be a pirate was not necessarily to live an exciting life full of adventure. In fact, for most pirates, their whole careers lasted just a few years. Most died before reaching middle age, either by battle, disease, or execution. Only a small percentage ever retired or lived to tell their story. So if we want to understand what it was like to be a pirate, it's important to understand that when we talk about pirates, we are generally talking about young men who lived and died in the 17th and 18th centuries, and it's not exactly clear that these men were any different to other men of the time, at least when it came to how long they lived. Life expectancy during this time was around 35 years old, and this was true all over the world, whether we're talking about China, Europe, Africa, or the Americas. This might sound shocking today, but there are two factors that we need to consider. Firstly, child mortality rates were extremely high. At least half of all children died before their 5th birthday, and only 3/4 of those that survived to childhood would make it to adulthood. This means that even if you did manage to get past your 5th birthday, your average life was still likely to be shorter than today. Secondly, when we say life expectancy, we mean average life. It doesn't mean that the average person died at 35. Rather, if we add up all the ages of all the people in a society and then divide that number by the population, we get an average. This is skewed heavily by the number of children dying, but it's also skewed by the fact that only a very small percentage of the population made it into old age. There are very few centenarians, so the average life is pulled down significantly by the lack of 90-year-olds. It was until the mid-20th century that advances in medicine and public health finally solved the problem of child mortality and pushed life expectancy over 50 for the first time. So while some people did reach old age during the golden age of piracy, this was certainly not the norm. As we saw in the last episode, many pirates died young from battle wounds, or from diseases picked up at sea or in port. But the truth is that even if they managed to stay alive, their lives were still likely to be short. We can get an idea of what life was like for a pirate over the course of his career by looking at the story of one man, Bartholomew Roberts. Roberts is thought to have been born around 1682 in the town of Cape Coast Castle on the Gold Coast of West Africa, now known as Ghana. This is significant because unlike most pirates, Roberts was not of European descent. He was, in fact, an African. Roberts grew up in Cape Coast Castle, which had been founded by the Swedish Africa Company in 1653. The town was originally intended as a trading post for the company's ships, but it quickly became a prison for slaves captured by the local tribes. By the time Roberts was born, the castle was owned by the British, and he spent his early life watching slave ships come and go. When he was old enough, Roberts found work as an apprentice to a tailor, but he soon left this trade to become a sailor on merchant ships. In 1719, Roberts was sailing off the coast of Africa, when his ship was attacked by fellow Welshman Henry Every. Every had already built a reputation as a ruthless pirate, and Roberts was taken captive. However, instead of making him walk the plank, Every offered Roberts a place in his crew. Roberts accepted and spent the next couple of years sailing with Every across the Atlantic and into the Caribbean. During this time, he sailed under the flag of France and plundered Spanish ships laden with treasure. In late 1721, Roberts and the rest of Evanes's crew landed on an island in the Bahamas where they divided the spoils of their raids, when they ran out of things to share. However, the crew turned on Evan and forced him to leave the island without any of his fortune. Roberts then turned his attention to piracy on the west coast of Africa. He raided both Portuguese and British ships and gained a reputation as a particularly brutal pirate, killing everyone on board except for the captain, whom he took back to Cape Coast Castle to be sold as a slave. After a couple of years, Roberts was pardoned by the King of Denmark and given noble titles and land in return for his treasure. He spent the remainder of his life running a casino and brothel. He died in 1725 after falling off the roof of his house while trying to escape a group of creditors. Roberts' story gives us an insight into the life of a pirate, not just in terms of the dangers and excitement, but also in terms of how long his career probably lasted. We don't know exactly when Roberts was born, but we do know that he died in 1725. If he was born in 1682, that would make him 43 years old when he died. But that's not really the interesting part. What's interesting is that Roberts' whole career as a pirate lasted no more than 6 years. He began working for Henry Every in 1719 and was pardoned in 1725. Between 1721 and 1722, he spent a couple of years sailing off the coast of Africa. The point is that Roberts had a long life by the standards of the time, but his career as a pirate was exceptionally short. This is hardly surprising. For most of human history, piracy has been little more than an extension of regular life at sea. Pirates were sailors that turned to lawlessness when it seemed to make good business sense. They lived and died aboard their ships, and their careers lasted as long as they remained able-bodied enough to work. Eventually, they would retire to land and try and make something of themselves. Sometimes this worked out, like it did for Roberts, but more often than not, they just ended up like Henry Every, dead by the hands of their former crewmates. So what does this mean? Did pirates have it bad? Well, yes, but they weren't alone. Their life expectancy was the same as everyone else's, and they died in the same ways. It's not that pirates died young because they were pirates. Rather, the fact that they were generally young men is why they died young. The golden age of piracy was not an era when men reached the heights of old age. For those of you that enjoyed this video and want to learn more about what it was like to be a pirate, I highly recommend reading Defoe's The History of the Pirates. Despite being written in 1724, the book isn't actually full of right-wing propaganda, as you might expect. Rather, it's a fascinating look at the beginnings of the modern world, through the eyes of someone living through it. Defoe's History of the Pirates is available to read for free online. Ahoy mateys, we be sailin' into chapter 14 of our swashbuckling journey through the golden age of piracy. And shiver me timbers, this be a tale full of blood and thunder as we explored the grim fates that befell those scurvy dogs who were caught in the act. In the lawless realm of the high seas, where danger lurked around every wave and betrayal could strike from the shadows, one question echoed among the salty crews: what be the worst way to die? Now let's find out together. As the sun set over the horizon, casting long shadows across the deck, the pirate ship sailed steadily towards its destination. On board, a motley crew of adventurers and miscreants, each with their own tales of daring exploits and buried treasures. Among them was Blackheart, a notorious pirate captain feared throughout the seven seas for his ruthlessness and cunning. At his side stood his first mate, a man with a parrot on his shoulder whose sharp wit and even sharper cutlass had earned him the respect of his fellow pirates. Together they led their crew in a life of adventure and plunder, striking fear into the hearts of sailors and merchants alike. But their latest target was proving to be a formidable challenge. A heavily armed and well-defended galleon laden with riches beyond their wildest dreams. As the pirate ship closed in on its prey, the air crackled with anticipation and the crew prepared for battle. Cannons roared and cutlasses clashed as the pirates launched their attack, determined to claim the treasure for themselves. Amidst the chaos and carnage, Blackheart and his first mate fought side by side, their blades flashing like lightning as they hacked and slashed at their opponents. With every swing, they brought the pirates one step closer to victory. But just as it seemed that the galleon would soon be theirs for the taking, a sudden change of events turned the tide of the battle. The captain of the guard, a grizzled veteran with a reputation for fearlessness and strength, had managed to escape the carnage on the lower decks and rally the remaining soldiers to his banner. Now, with renewed vigor, the defenders fought back, driving the pirates back and forcing them to retreat. Despite their valiant efforts, the pirates had suffered heavy losses and the battle was far from over. Blackheart and his first mate knew that they needed a new plan. If they were going to stand any chance of winning, Retreating to the safety of their ship, they gathered their crew and began to strategize. They knew that the galleon was heavily guarded, and that a frontal assault would only result in more casualties. So they decided to try something different. Under the cover of darkness, they would sneak up on the galleon and infiltrate it undetected. With the element of surprise on their side, they would be able to overpower the guards and plunder the treasure without resistance. Their plan was risky, but it was their best chance of success. So with the fate of their fortune hanging in the balance, the pirates set into action. In the dead of night, they slipped into the water and swam towards the galleon, moving with the grace and precision of seasoned professionals. Meanwhile, the soldiers on guard had no inkling of the danger that lay so close. As the pirates made their way onto the ship, they moved with stealth and agility, avoiding the patrolling guards and staying hidden in the shadows. Finally, they reached the treasure room, and with the guards fast asleep, they opened the doors and made their move. The sight that greeted them was like a dream come true. Chests overflowing with gold, silver and jewels glittered before their eyes, promising untold riches and a life of luxury. But their moment of triumph was short-lived. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the corridor and the pirates froze in their tracks. The captain of the guard, alerted to the intrusion, had mustered a small force to investigate. Now he stood in the doorway, his face contorted with rage and his sword drawn and ready to strike. Trapped and outnumbered, the pirates knew that their luck had run out. A fierce battle ensued, but the pirates were no match for the captain and his men. One by one they fell to the ground, their dreams of escaping with the treasure dashed against the cold hard stones of the treasure room floor. Blackheart and his first mate fought valiantly, but they were ultimately captured along with the rest of their crew. As the sun rose the next morning, the streets of the port city buzzed with excitement. The citizens gathered in the town square to watch the spectacle of the captured pirates paraded through the streets on their way to the gallows. The sight of the defeated crew, their faces bruised and bloodied, their heads held high in defiance, was a grim reminder of the dangers of a life of piracy. The pirates were then subjected to a series of torturous punishments, designed to break their spirits and serve as a warning to other would-be adventurers. The first mate, known for his sharp wit and even sharper cutlass, was hung first. A noose was placed around his neck and the ladder was kicked away, leaving him dangling helplessly in the air. As the crowd watched intently, he struggled valiantly against the rope, his face contorted in a silent scream. But slowly but surely, the life drained from his eyes and his body grew still. Then it was Blackheart's turn. The infamous pirate captain, known for his ruthlessness and cunning, was next. He mounted the platform with a swagger, seemingly unfazed by the grim fate that awaited him. A black hood was placed over his head and the heavy wooden block was secured under his chin. Just as the executioner raised his axe, Blackheart's eyes flashed with defiance. In a last-ditch effort to escape his fate, he lunged forward, knocking the axe away and sending it clattering to the ground. For a moment, there was stunned silence as the crowd gasped at the unexpected turn of events. But it was short-lived. Enraged by the interruption, the executioner grabbed Blackheart by the collar and dragged him back to the block. With a final, "Beware the consequences of your actions," the axe fell, ending Blackheart's reign of terror once and for all. After the executions, the bodies of the pirates were left hanging in the town square as a warning to other would-be adventurers. The sight of the rotting flesh and the stench of death served as a grim reminder of the dangers of a life of crime. The treasure that had been stolen from the galleon was recovered and divided among the townspeople. It was a small consolation for the lives that had been lost, but it did little to ease the pain of the brutal spectacle they had been forced to endure. This tale, me hearties, is a reminder that the pursuit of fortune and glory on the high seas can lead to a most terrifying end. The golden age of piracy was a time when the line between hero and villain was often blurred. Pirates like Blackheart and his first mate, while feared and reviled, were also celebrated for their daring exploits and their willingness to take on the establishment. But as this story shows, the cost of such a life was high, and the consequences of being caught were dire. Now gather round the landlubbers, and let's spin a yarn about the most dreaded pirates of the Caribbean. I be talking about the likes of Blackbeard, Captain Kidd, and Calico Jack, and Shiver Me Timbers. The stories of their bloody escapades will make your blood run cold. If they be brave enough to face the tales of these legendary swashbucklers. Stay tuned for more adventures on the high seas. And remember, in the world of piracy, the only thing more dangerous than the storms that rage on the ocean, the wrath of the law. So until we meet again, keep an eye out for those pesky revenue cutters and pray that ye never find yourselves on the wrong side of the law. And now, me hearty, I ask thee, what be the worst way to die in your mind? Share your thoughts below, and mayhap we'll spin a yarn about it in a future tale. And if ye be as bold as the bravest pirate, drop a like on this video and subscribe for more swashbuckling adventures. Why are you still here? Go on, get out of here. I'm trying to write. Behind the myth lies a world of hunger, disease, violence, and fear. A pirate's life was not adventure. It was survival against impossible odds. But when we look back at history, we see that it is a story that is still being written. For pirates once roamed the seas where we sail today, pillaging on the riches of merchants and monarchs alike. They were outlaws, yes, but they were also survivors. Join me for this final chapter in our series on pirates, where we will uncover the truth about their lives. You might be surprised by what you discover. If there is anything that history teaches us, it is that the past is never as clear-cut as we like to think. Pirates were neither noblemen nor scum of the earth. They were men and women who fought for their very survival on a daily basis. They lived in a time when the world was a much harsher place than it is today. Disease was rampant, food was scarce, and violence was commonplace. For many people, life was a constant struggle just to stay alive. But even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. And for some, that hope came in the form of adventure. The lure of the open sea was too strong for many young men to resist. They left their homes and families behind and set sail for uncharted waters. They braved storms and shipwrecks, fought off deadly creatures, and explored new lands. But above all, they survived. And in doing so, they made a name for themselves as pirates. We think of pirates as swashbuckling adventurers who plundered treasure and jewels from unsuspecting ships. And while this may have been true in some cases, it was not the reality for most pirates. In fact, piracy was a brutal and dangerous profession, and most pirates were little more than sailors who had been forced into a life of crime. They were often victims of circumstance, such as when a ship's crew mutinied and took control of the vessel, or when a ship was captured by enemy forces and the crew was left with no other option than to flee. Some pirates were former soldiers who had seen enough bloodshed and were looking for a change of pace. Others were simply tired of working for low wages and decided to take matters into their own hands. Whatever the reason, these men and women were united by one common goal: survival. For a pirate, life was a constant battle against hunger, thirst, and fatigue. Food was often scarce and water was hard to come by. And the endless struggle to find both meant that pirates were constantly on edge. This was especially true when they were on land, as they were then at the mercy of the elements. To make matters worse, pirates were often hunted by the very governments that they had once served. They became enemies of the state and were wanted for crimes such as murder, piracy, and treason. This meant that pirates had to constantly be on the run, and they could never truly feel safe anywhere. Life for a pirate was not all about the thrill of the chase or the promise of riches beyond measure. It was a day-to-day struggle to stay alive in a world that offered little hope for those who dared to go against the grain. They were outlaws, yes, but they were also survivors. They were the forgotten heroes of a bygone era. And while their stories may be lost to time, their memory lives on in the tales that have been passed down through generations. When we think of pirates today, we often do so with a sense of whimsy or nostalgia. We remember them as daring adventurers who sailed the high seas in search of fortune and glory. But the reality was much different. The life of a pirate was one of constant struggle and hardship, a battle against hunger, thirst, and fatigue. They were outlaws, yes, but they were also survivors. Men and women who fought for their very survival every single day. As we bring this chapter to a close, let us take a moment to remember the real pirates, not the mythical figures of legend, but the ordinary people who did extraordinary things. Let us pay tribute to their courage and resilience in the face of impossible odds. Let us also remember the lessons they can teach us about survival and the importance of fighting for what we believe in. For pirates were not just outlaws, they were pioneers, explorers, and adventurers who dared to go where no one had gone before. They were the original free spirits who valued freedom and independence above all else. They were the rebels who refused to conform to the rules and regulations of society. They were the risk-takers who were willing to live on the edge and take their chances with the unknown. In a world that often seems too safe and too predictable, let us not forget the legacy of the pirates. Let us embrace the spirit of adventure and exploration that they embodied and never stop exploring the world around us. Let us never lose our sense of wonder and curiosity about the world. And let us always be willing to stand up for what we believe in, no matter what the cost may be. So, as we say goodbye to this chapter, let us raise a glass to the pirates, the original free spirits who taught us that life is too short to be anything but ourselves. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the world of pirates. I hope you enjoyed learning about their lives and their times. If you want to learn more about history, please subscribe. And now, as you drift to sleep, remember that you are safe on land, far from the horrors of the pirate's sea. Dream sweet dreams, and may your adventures be filled with joy and wonder, just like the pirates who sailed the high seas so long ago. Now I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. What has surprised you the most about the life of pirates? How do you think their way of life differed from our own, and what lessons can we learn from their story? I would love to hear your thoughts and insights, so please don't hesitate to share them below. In addition, if you found this video interesting, I invite you to check out my others for more fascinating historical content. Who knows, you might just discover something that intrigues you even more. Thanks for watching. See you next time.